Okay, good morning again. We're going to go ahead and get started with our final presenter for the session. Maybe, perhaps. Yeah, there we go. All right. I want to introduce, and I will mangle your name. I apologize. I want to introduce our final presenter for this session. This is Richard Tuinstra. Sorry, got it. He's a GISP and the senior GIS manager for the city of Wilmington. He received his master's degree in geography in 1988 from the University of Groningen. Hey, 2 for 2 in the Netherlands, and attended his first ever GIS training class in 1992. For those in the know, those were the days of PC ArcInfo, digitizing tablets and pen plotters. I have nightmares about those things, yeah. He's got more than 25 years of experience in GIS, working in public and private sector, moved to North Carolina from his native country, the Netherlands, in 2000. He was the GIS manager for the city of Fayetteville before moving to Wilmington in 2018. He also enjoys going on the water in his free time and has caught a fish here or there. We might have to hear a fish story. So welcome.
Thank you so much, Sally, and you did a really good job with the Dutch. I think you might have some Dutch in you. Also, thanks to Darren and Wendy for their great presentations. I don't think I can live up to their high standard, but I'm going to make a try. I'm also going to make it short and snappy because I realize that lunch is on the way and I'm the last person standing between you and lunch. So let's move on as quickly as I can. Otherwise, I might just have to rename this presentation How Not to Give a Presentation Part 3 as a follow-up to yesterday's presentations. My presentation is going to be about AIS that has to do with water. We already alluded a little bit to it. We moved here a couple of years ago and I've really gotten into boating and fishing. So that kind of was the topic of this, kind of an inspiration for the topic of this presentation as well. Other big inspirations were my love of 70s prog rock. So Styx and Come Sail Away inspired me for the title, and Hartman had a brilliant cover version maybe 20 years ago in an episode of South Park. Next slide, please. Oh, that works when you say that. That's great. It's fantastic. So what I'm going to be talking about, I'm going to talk a little about what AIS is and what we have used it for. Talk a little bit about the case study, why we actually use this data. That might actually surprise you. And then in the end, I'm going to have some conclusions. The photo on top is actually a photo I took a couple of months ago. We started boating. We have a little boat, so we went on the Cape Fear, and nothing is scarier than seeing a ship this size coming at you. And AIS actually might be really helpful in preventing those kind of encounters. Next slide, please. So what is AIS? And so it stands for Automatic Identification Systems, AIS. It's not new technology. It was started somewhere in the 90s, and it's basically, it tracks where vessels are on the ocean and the rivers. The photos that you see here, so this one here is like how it looks kind of on the ship. The second one is how the Coast Guard uses it. And the other one is kind of like a chart plotter that you can actually, some of this stuff you can see online. So it's pretty cool technology. And one of the reasons, you know, when you do GIS for so long, sometimes it's hard to get excited about something, but discovering this new data set, at least it was a new discovery for me, it really got me excited. I mean, you all might know about this. I didn't. So what I found is like, oh, wow, this is cool. So next slide, please. I'm going to skip a little bit quicker through this because this is kind of technical stuff, and I'm really not a technical person, but it all has to do with Vhf transmitters that are on ships. It goes with time frames that the little picture there shows. But the only thing that's really important is that it tracks the location of a ship in a certain time frame, and it also collects all the information about speed and the name and call stuff like the name of the boat and everything else. So, and it keeps on transmitting that information constantly. It's a large, I mean, every large vessel has AIS, and the best thing about this data is it's publicly available. I mean, anybody can use this data. Next slide, please. Again, a pretty technical part here. I'm gonna rush through this a little bit quicker. So you have three different types of transceivers. You have transceivers that are on board in the ships themselves. Then you have transceivers that are on the coast usually, so the Coast Guard uses this, but also like ports can use this information that to receive the AIS information. And then fairly recently, also satellites have AIS systems now, or like can listen to AIS signals and transfer it over the rest on kind of on a global scale. Pretty cool technology. It constantly changes too. It's like a field which is rapidly developing, and it's I mean, again, it's pretty exciting, I think. Next slide, please. I thought this was cool. Talking about the developing technology, these little AIS transceivers are now so small that you can actually have it on your body. It's amazing and cheap, right? $309 on sale. I mean, it's amazing. So I was thinking, if you go on a cruise ship or something and you drink too much and you stumble back to your cabin, fall overboard, you actually might be okay if you have one of these beacons on you. I'm not sure it would have helped Leonardo DiCaprio, but for anybody else in modern days, it might actually be helpful. Next slide, please. So a lot of these main uses for AIS are pretty logical, right? So it's being used a lot for collision avoidance, although I don't know what happened to those ships at the bottom right, because that seems really bad. But it also is used for fishing fleet monitoring. Of course, there's areas where you really shouldn't be fishing, restricted for fishing, and AIS can keep the authorities a little track on where the ships are. Also, and I've learned it recently too, when you start fishing, people don't like to tell you where the best fishing spots are. So if you have an AIS system, then people can see, well, you know, that ship went out yesterday. They stayed there quite a long time. They must have caught some fish there. People don't want to know that. So not always helpful. But yeah, it helps with navigating, especially, of course, during bad weather and storms like that, and search and rescue, accident investigation. And the last, you can't really see on the slide here, but I thought it was pretty interesting too. It's being used for scientific research as well, for like ocean current estimates and stuff like that. Again, it was a completely new area for me, and it's like just learning about all these different uses was pretty exciting. Next slide, please. What I already said, not everybody wants to have the AIS system on. Like these are all like headlines from newspapers. Of course, there's always people that have the wrong information, and there's something called an MMSI. That's kind of like unique identifier, maritime mobile service identity. It doesn't always track with the vessel itself, not always for the various reasons, but there's a lot of things wrong with it sometimes. But the second newspaper clip does have to do with fishing, so that people don't want to tell other people where they're fishing, so they want to keep the secret. And of course, there's also reason in times of war that, you know, if you have a warship or whatever, you don't want to have your system on. You see that a little bit later. Next slide, please. I said before, like all this data is available. There's a ton of websites out there where you can see this data almost in real time. And you can see on this map, I really like this website. Actually, it's the best. It's marine traffic. Most of these websites have a lot of these annoying pop-up apps. They're free, but you know, you click on it and stuff comes up. This is probably one of the better ones. But you can see here that it's a global system, right? And it's amazing the amount. See, like on the left, you see here all the different types of vessels that are on there. So it's semi-live, right? When you go zoom in, you actually can some of these ships move. So again, I thought it was pretty cool, and that's why I wanted to share this. But I mean, and I understand it's not useful for everybody, but when you live in a coastal area like we do, it actually does come in handy sometimes. Next slide, please. Jeff, what is that kind of question is that, Jeff? Yeah, so this is an example from our area here in Wilmington. We're actually located right here. This is not live, by the way, so this is from a couple of weeks ago. But yeah, you see it again, there's like all this information is online. And when you click on these points, it also gives you all the information and shows you a photo and everything. That's pretty cool. Next slide, please. Ooh, a little quiz. Does anybody reckon this is a large port? Can anybody guess what port this would be? This is a geography question. I have no prizes available, but kudos to the one that can actually guess what this is. I give you a little bit of a hint. Where am I from? It is Rotterdam. Yeah, the largest harbor and largest port in the world. So you see there's all these different ships going on. And again, when you zoom in there, you can actually see them move. It's pretty cool. And then the next slide. I thought this was interesting, so I was curious to see how the whole war in Ukraine, and you see here, like you see, it does get blocked out. So Ukraine part here, north of the Black Sea there, you see the ships going into Russia right there, but you see that whole part, I mean, the transponders are not on, so you can't really track anything there for obvious reasons. Next slide, please. Apps. There's also a ton of apps out there, which is actually pretty useful when you go on a boat. You see something on the horizon, like pretty small, but it comes towards you. You can go in your AIS like, oh darn, that's a big cargo ship. Let's get out of here. Again, most of these apps are free, but and they use the same information, but it's pretty useful when you're on a boat. Next slide, please. Yeah, so we use this data for trains, which is kind of weird, but it makes sense when I try to explain it. So Wilmington has a lot of freight rail tracks that kind of like the problem areas where it kind of encircles the downtown area. And this is a headline. This actually happened a couple of years ago where CSX suddenly decided without giving any advance warning to do maintenance on most of the rail crossings downtown, meaning that everybody got stuck in the area, couldn't get out for a couple of hours, which is of course a big problem, especially for fire and police. They couldn't get out of the area, couldn't come into the area. So the city has started a rail realignment project where they try to change some of the tracks so that it doesn't go to the downtown area. Can I see the next slide, please? I'm trying to speed it up a little bit. I see I'm already halfway. But anyway, these are some maps that shows you the downtown area right here. So all the red dots are railroad crossings. There's a ton of them there. And apart from doing maintenance in the middle of the day when there's all this traffic going on, of course, every railroad crossing has a certain level of danger with it. So every time I saw a presentation this morning about railroad crossings, and I saw the number of fatalities every year. So the less you have them in a downtown area, the better, because these are only used for freight. It's not like for people transportation. And the map on the right shows you a little bit different here. So this is the port of Wilmington here. And you see here it goes from here and just circles around the downtown area. And really the idea is to cut through here and go this way so we can bypass all that. Next slide, please. I apologize for the calls. We didn't make this map. This is not a GIS team produced map, but anyway, it shows you what it would look like, and it also explains why this AIS data was useful. So the idea is to come here from the port and then cross over here. So we would have 2 new bridges for this rail realignment project. And in order to make this happen, you need all these permits and everything else. And one thing that the Coast Guard needs, actually the Coast Guard needs is a navigation impact report where you need to report on the usage of the river. Next slide. So this was basically the questions that we got, and to help with this navigation impact report, with specific questions, and most of them really relate to how many ships actually pass under the existing bridges, give an idea how busy they are, how many go from bridge number 1 to bridge number 2. Interestingly, though, the city had contract with a lot of engineers for this project and had something set aside like $50,000 to answer these questions. And most of the companies didn't have a clue on how to collect this data. They were actually just kind of like, their suggestion was to just do field work. Just sit next to a bridge, sit there for an extended period of time and count how many ships would go under the bridge. Fortunately, the city was smart enough to contact the GIS team and thought maybe they would have a better solution than just sitting there for a couple of weeks. And that's when we start looking at like, hey, what kind of data is available that could help us with that? And hence the discovery, at least discovery for me, of the AIS data. Next slide, please. It is the NCAUG conference, so I do want to bring in Esri and ArcGIS. Esri actually has a really well documented workflow for dealing with AIS data. I was actually really impressed by that. I don't want to go to the workflow in like extensive detail, but it makes sense, right? You download the data and all this data is available in CSS format. It's just like large files. I mean, there's no easy way where you can select CSVs for your specific area. So you have to download a lot at the same time. So the workflow is download these CSV files, create a big data connection in ArcGIS Pro to connect to these CSV files, and then use that to convert the CSV file to point features, and then Esri has a neat tool where you can convert those point features in a track. And that's the tracks that we need. We need to see how many tracks we're going on these bridges. Next slide, please. This is how it would look like in ArcGIS Pro. It's kind of the same as the previous slide, but this just show you how it would work in ArcGIS Pro. Next slide, please. This is how it would kind of look like in ArcGIS Pro. There's also some other utilities available to use this data. Again, big surprise to me, but they do exist. You see it on the right. So Marine Cadastre, where we download the data from, also has a couple of ArcGIS Pro utilities, some couple of toolboxes that are really handy. You also see here, if you can see it, like these vessels here, like the large numbers. I think it's something for 9 million tracks for that year that we had. Next slide, please. And this is the data that's actually in those these CSV AAS files. So you get that MMSI number again, so unique identifier, and then information about the length, the width of the ship, but also the speed at that moment, the name. I was actually curious about this ship here, the Margaret McAllister. I looked it up yesterday because you can just type in that MMSI and it will show you where it is right now. Apparently it's now in Charleston. Next slide, please. So you get all these points, make them into tracks, see how many actually go on the bridge, and that's the answer that we came up with. So for this year, I think, and that's how it would look like in ArcGIS Pro, I think was 608 vessels with AIS, right? That's important to realize. Not every ship has AIS. So that's the only data I actually have was this AIS data. So those were the numbers that we came up with. Next slide. What we also didn't realize is that NCDOT has data available. I don't think this is necessarily publicly available, but they do have data of bridge openings. So you can contact them, and if you have a good reason, you can get this data, which was really useful just to correlate the numbers that we had and see if they would actually make sense. Because when you come up with a number of 608 going under the Cape Fear Memorial Bridge, is that a lot or not a lot? It sounds like not a lot to me, but so we needed something to correlate it with, and this data is actually really helpful, available, and just every time a bridge opens, all this data gets collected. Who knew? I didn't know that. And next slide, please. So this was the end result. So we had these 4 points we need to collect data for. So this is the big one, the Cape Fear Memorial Bridge, 608, and then Isabel Holmes had 252, and the other two had lesser numbers, like especially this one, really not a lot of ships go there. Makes sense. When you know the area, it makes sense. Anyway, next slide. That was it. That's all we came up with. I mean, it's not a high technical presentation. We didn't use any Python. It was just getting this data. But yes, it was a great success. Actually, we got like this letter beginning of the year, I think in March, that the navigation impact report was approved, and that they actually, NCDOT and Coast Guard that we contacted had never heard of using AIS data for this kind of study. So we were kind of like, we're pioneers. Yay! Anyway, so we did save the city a ton of money, but we also got a lot of goodwill out of this whole project. So like when you have a problem that you don't know how to do, it's like you might want to contact your GIS team. They might have a solution for that. And that's kind of the end of my presentation, because the next slide is the end of the presentation. So that's me. We bought fishing kayaks a couple of weeks ago. It's been a lot of fun. But my wife's has an even better one. She has all this garment stuff on there, like fish finders, whatever. You can, she's got everything. It also has AIS. So now we have a fishing kayak with AIS. Score for us. Anyway, that was my presentation. Thank you so much. I don't want to see that. Question. Uh, the question is, what do we do with ships that either don't have them switched on or don't have AIS? How we would count for that? We honestly didn't. I mean, we were pretty clear in the studies, like, well, the numbers that we have are counting vessels with AIS. Of course, there's a lot of vessels go under the Cape Fear Bridge. They're like smaller boats, maybe fishing vessels, like tourist boats. There's like a marina north of it, and they have like smaller vessels. So there's probably more coming on there, but we didn't. How do you account for that? Because then you really would almost have to sit at the bridge and start counting. Good question. Thank you. Yes. So the question is if you're required to have AIS on. Yes, I think the official rule is, and it's international rule, when you have 300 gross tonnage, which is kind of like the volume of the ship, and it goes above that, you are required to have AIS on. Now, I'm not sure if there's something like an AIS police that will hound you when you switch to have off, because I was thinking about that security as well. If you're like a smuggler bringing in cocaine to the coast and you have a large ship, you're not going to switch it on. But would that be getting in trouble itself by not having it on when required to? So I really don't know if there's anything like fines or if you get in big trouble or not. I really don't know. But I've been wondering that myself, yes. Any other questions? Lunch. Oh, one more. One. No? If there's other ways of transportation that might be using AIS data, I think it's strictly maritime though. A railroad or trains, I'm not sure if they would. Well, the trains is the problem. I don't think they use AIS data. It's more like, yeah, so I don't think so, but I mean, I think there's probably better ways. I mean, the reason why AIS is so important for maritime is because you use it VHF, and it's like in the middle of the ocean, you don't have a whole lot of. So it really was originally defined for short range tracking, so you want to see what's near you. I mean, these later use where you can see everything that's really came later. The technology is evolving and everything. So I don't think it would be really any use for trains, but who knows? Okay, thank you.